My sound wasn't working at the time, so I didn't quite catch you.
All right, I've started recording. Thank you everyone for joining this week's, the April 10th OpenJ9 community call. We'll kick things off right away with a lightning talk from Andrew on OpenSSL. So Andrew, what I'll do is I'll stop sharing and you can take over.
Okay, thank you. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So, a lightning talk. How long is a lightning talk? 3 minutes?
Yeah, somewhere between, no minutes and 15.
Excellent. Well, probably about 5. Here we go. So, OpenSSL support for OpenJDK with Eclipse OpenJ9. So, what is OpenSSL? So, OpenSSL.org is an open source community that provides a commercial grade TLS and SSL protocol set. Basically a high performance set of cryptographic protocols, and it's kept up to date by the community with the latest CVEs, and is an active community. So how do we use it with Eclipse OpenJ9? So OpenJDK provides the Java JCE, Java cryptographic, I can't remember what the E stands for, provider integration to enable plugging of cryptographic providers into the Java runtime. The default supplied set, which is the standard Oracle set for those 4 protocols. With this added support for Eclipse OpenJ9 based OpenJDK, we override those protocols to use the OpenSSL equivalent support for those cryptographic protocols. Currently, adopt OpenJDK, where you can get the binaries for Eclipse OpenJ9 based OpenJDK. JDK 11 and 12 support OpenSSL version 102, and 8, 11, and 12 support 1.1. There's the libraries can be loaded or bundled in slightly different ways in the standard binaries that are obtained from adopt on Linux and AIX platforms. The default library is dynamically linked. So basically, if it's available as a system OpenSSL library on your runtime platform, then the JCE provider will automatically find it from the library path and load it and use it as a cryptographic provider for those protocols. On Windows, currently on Windows and Mac OS, the libraries are still statically bundled, as in we build the OpenSSL native libraries and actually bundle them in the JDK image. So that's just a quick summary of the OpenSSL, what it is and how we use it. So what are the advantages? So basically it provides increased performance for the cryptographic operations over the standard JCE provider from OpenJDK. So the standard JCE provider is actually optimized for hotspot-based OpenJDK. It is intrinsically optimized for cryptographic operations, which is obviously not suited or doesn't match the performance profile of Eclipse OpenJ9. So by using OpenSSL as the provider, instead, we can have enhanced cryptographic performance over using the standard JCE provider, which is not optimized for OpenJ9. The other advantage is that because OpenSSL is continuously kept up to date with the latest patches, as long as your platform system libraries are kept up to date, then you will be automatically up to date with the latest vulnerability patches. Okay, enablement. So by default, the OpenSSL support is enabled as long as the library can be found. However, should you wish to disable a specific protocol, you can do that by specifying a runtime option, jdk.native, and the given protocol equals false. Or if you want to disable them altogether, the OpenSSL support altogether, you can just set the JDK native crypto to false, and it will then fall back to using the standard OpenJDK JCE implementation. Okay, if you want to build your own JDK with OpenSSL support, there's 3 ways you can do this. If you want to build one that makes use of the of a system packaged OpenSSL on the target runtime, then you need to use the configure option with OpenSSL system, which will configure the make and build of your JDK to assume that it will find, the runtime will find the OpenSSL libraries on the target system. The second option is if you've got you've not using the system or you've got a system, but you've got a specific OpenSSL that you've downloaded and you want to build your JDK with instead, you can actually specify with OpenSSL configure option and a path to that specific OpenSSL version that you've downloaded. And it will then build the JDK with those headers found from that OpenSSL version. And the other option is to tell the build system. So this is if you've not got any OpenSSL locally, is you can tell the OpenJDK build to fetch and build the desired version. So if you run the get sources script with the specified version you'd like it to download with the OpenSSL version option, 102 or 1.1x, and then specify the configure option with OpenSSL fetched. So that will then be, so the get sources will download from openssl.org the required version, and then the bash configure will then know to find the given OpenSSL version in the standard location in which get sources downloads them into, which is actually a directory called OpenSSL in your workspace. And finally, bundling or dynamic linking to OpenSSL. So by default, the runtime dynamically links to OpenSSL. Now, if you would like to build your own and bundle the OpenSSL that you've specified within that JDK binary, that your JDK image, you can specify the enable OpenSSL bundling as part of the configure option. You'll then end up with a JDK image with the native OpenSSL libraries bundled within it. That's it. Any questions?
Thanks, Andrew. So I have a question to kick things off. can you talk a little bit about why we bundle versus dynamically linking?
So bundling, one of the disadvantages of bundling is that you've fixed the version of the native libraries we're using, which means if you want to be kept up to date with the latest CVEs and patches, etc., you would have to update the in fact, I'm not quite sure how you do it, but you'd have to update the OpenSSL directly in the bundled image location. Whereas if it's if you specify the runtime linking option, then you're linking to your system installed, package installed OpenSSL version, which in some environments is probably kept up to date by a local admin to the latest OpenSSL package level available from openssl.org, which is obviously the more desirable solution.
Can I just jump in there, Andrew?
Yeah, sure.
No matter what we do with this, whether you're bundling or not, we're still dynamically linking. The enabling OpenSSL bundling just means we're going to actually deliver the OpenSSL libraries with the JDK image. If we don't bundle, we don't deliver it with the JDK image. So we'll try and find the library on the system. Yes,
that makes sense. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so I'm not. So when we say we're bundled, I'm not exactly sure where we bundled it.
It's bundled as part of the JDK image in the libraries.
Yeah, somewhere in there. So if someone wanted to update that, they'd have to find it, which is they could update that. Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Andrew? All right. Thank you then, Andrew.
All right. Thanks, Dan. Let me just stop sharing. Yeah. There we go. Hopefully that's stopped now.
And I'll bring the agenda back up. And we'll open things up to any community issues or any community questions, anything anybody wants to discuss. So I see, just trying to pull up the list of participants. All right. So I see a lot of the very similar faces. So I think unless there's a question particularly here, I will pull up the recent user raised labels or user raised issues, and we'll take a look at whether there's anything new that's come in that needs to be taken a look at, or that anybody can jump in to help with. So there's some issues with the JMX memory pools reporting incorrect data, and so that's being looked at. Looks like the IBM I team is looking to get some changes in. So there's a couple of pull requests from them. Then there's a request to have Java core files written to standard out by default, which is interesting. It's something we've had requested before around the ability to redirect them to standard out. And so we've added support for that. And now the request is to make it happen by default. So I think there's some larger discussion needed there on what that does for serviceability of OpenJ9. There was a concern around the shared classes cache. When we added new bytecodes in Java 8 for the truncating returns smaller than an int, we didn't update the cache generation, and that led to some verify errors when mixing older VMs and newer VMs on the same cache. Bytecodes that are added across releases, so when you update a new bytecode for Java 13 or something, that won't break the cache compatibility because the Java release is already baked in. But just a reminder to everybody that we do need to be thinking about that cache generation number when modifying the structures of the shared classes cache, the ROM class, or adding bytecodes. And then I think, JIT code cache was more similar issues to the first one. This idle tuning GC on idle was raised because we were finding that, or someone is finding that the option doesn't behave in the way they were expecting. They were expecting that turning this off would stop all GCing, when really what it stops is the GC from freeing pages. And so we'd probably need to do some adjustments of what those options mean, or possibly introduce a new option that completely disables any GC on idle. This was a performance concern that was raised around MXBean code. It's being looked at by both Sharon locally and by Andrew Craig. So we've got a couple of people looking at that. And then a couple of other issues around Nashorn performance, which ties into some of the work that has been going into to improve our inlining when dealing with JSR 292, so method handles and invoke dynamic. Details are in the issue. And then this is more of our updating to use the signals. I believe there's a design for this opened in the OMR project for how to update this. And that brings us to the end of the recent user raised issues. So I think unless there's any questions or comments on these, we'll jump back to the agenda.
That a JIT code cache issue is not similar to the other one. It seems to be a bug with the JIT code cache. It's creating new code caches, putting very little content into them, and then abandoning them.
Oh.
And I understand there's also a footprint problem, which hasn't been tracked down yet. So they might be one and the same problem.
All right. Good to see that we've caught this then. Hopefully we can get that fixed quickly. So taking a look at the 0.14 release, today is the 10th. And I believe we launched the builds for Milestone 1 this morning.
Yes, that's correct. Some of the platforms are built and now running the tests. Others are still building.
So that's JDK 8 only, I think, so far?
That's 8 only, yes. That is true.
We have an outlook on 11 or 12.
I don't myself.
Do we have somebody lined up to take launching those?
I'm assuming that Andrew is going to oblige, but he's mysteriously disappeared, so I can't ask him right now.
All right. You can follow up with them. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a user who is waiting for the JDK 11 milestone to try out one of the fixes.
Great news to have. And then April 16th. Have we had any other discussions around getting the updates run and merged?
Not really. We could have one now. So for 8, the milestone one is still based off the BO1 level of 212 BO1 level of code that we took from OpenJDK. There is a BO2 level available. We could start merging that code in, but I'm expecting there will be a further update actually on next week when on delivery day. So we'll probably have to do it again there anyway. So I was going to ask whether we would like to wait for that or whether we think it's worth putting the effort in to get a BO2 build out in the interim.
I think the sooner we merge that in, the better, just in case there's any issues that show up along the way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I can get on with that for 8.
Has there been new levels for 11 or 12?
There's a new level for 11, a build 6. And then 12, I don't think there are any levels. Sorry, did I cut myself off there? I don't think there are any levels for 12.
Okay. As Andrew's not on the call, can we sign him up for getting the new 11 release merged in as well?
Yes, I'll talk to him when I see him about what the plan is. So I think from the point of view of getting the code up to date, that's kind of ongoing. So it's more just, so I'm not quite sure it's going. I know we've been having trouble trying to make that merge process faster. So I need to review with him where we're at and what position we're in to start producing this.
Yeah, so
milestone.
He does have a faster process, but it involves changing our history of the extensions. So what we were thinking is not making that change until after we get this release out the door, which means still doing the slow merge process this week and next week.
Is this a matter of getting some better hardware to throw behind that merge process?
Well, that was a suggestion I made. So it's currently with using the Git filter to filter out the code we don't want to take from OpenJDK. I think it was I/O bound and not CPU bound when we looked. I know he was also investigating filtering at the Mercurial side rather than the Git side, and that showed promise too. And I think then it was CPU bound, so that might be another avenue we can explore then, as Peter says. Perhaps not in the next week.
If it's I/O bound, has anyone tried it on a RAM drive yet?
I think Andrew didn't have that much improvement. But I have to check with him.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just to get the this build out on time to make sure that if it's just a matter of getting a bigger, better machine behind this rather than some of the typical Jenkins nodes, then we should look at what we can do to make that happen. Any other, actually I should pull up the milestone and we should take a look at what issues are still in the milestone plan at this point. So this was a PR to update the shared classes cache generation number to work around the user raised issue I was talking about earlier. So that PR will take care of this issue from the 14 milestone. The code cache limits, I see we've added this to the 14 milestone. Do we have a pull request ready for this?
No, I think that's a problem on the JIT side. I'm not sure they've tracked it down yet.
Okay. This is the one about creating multiple code caches?
Right. So I know there's a footprint issue that's outstanding that's also being investigated. And in case this is one and the same, I added it to the milestone.
Okay.
Otherwise, so far we only know this occurs on ZOS, which of course doesn't affect OpenJ9 builds.
So we'll need to make a call very quickly to see if we can get that resolved or moved out, especially if it's Z only.
Right. So the footprint issue, for which we don't have any open issue, is apparently a blocker. Something that we shouldn't ship with that problem outstanding.
Is that affect other platforms or only affect ZOS?
No, I think it affects other platforms, Linux. Have to double check.
All right. We'll follow up.
Might be across the board.
Okay. Were we able to get core files for this issue? I know we've talked about it yesterday.
Adam's been logging into the machine and working on it.
Okay. Good to hear. This, I believe, continues to be our get-end failure, which we've taken one run at fixing. Didn't actually resolve the problem. And so we'll have to continue to see if we can find why get-end is failing on OS X. That one we may need to move out this release. And then I see there's another couple of JIT issues here that I don't know what the state of them is. I'll have to follow up with Mark or with the relevant people after this call.
The footprint issue we were talking about is reported on also hits other platforms.
Sorry, Pete, a lot of skipping there I didn't catch.
The footprint issue we were talking about is reported on X Linux, and I'm not sure if it hits other platforms as well.
Okay. So yeah, then we'll certainly changes the concern around shipping that. I'll continue to follow up with these items and see if we can get some updates on where we're at. Skipping over this, we'll do another retrospective after this releases out and see how things have been going. Do we have an update from Adopt? Okay.
Well, from my perspective, we're busy trying to get the next quarterly release out. I'm not able to provide much input about any dramatic changes in infrastructure since we last spoke. ICT builds, I believe, are now there, and we're hoping we can get them integrated into the installers in time for the quarterly next week, but obviously time's getting pressing now.
A big thank you to everybody who's been involved in the ICT work. It's a great step for the project. For moving OpenJ9 to its own GitHub organization, there's continued to be discussion in the contributor teams bug about being able to add contributors to teams. A lot of interest in at least being able to assign issues to contributors. Things beyond that, such as creating labels and the like, probably aren't doable right now, given the current Eclipse process rules around who can have write access to a repo, but assigning contributors should certainly be possible. So we'll continue to engage in that item to make sure that we can move that forward. Adam, do you want to give an update on the infrastructure?
Sure. Not a huge update this week. The biggest change is we've switched over the Linux builds to use Cent 6 instead of Ubuntu 16. So we have 7 of those machines right now. The Ubuntu 16 machines are still there, so they're still being used for testing purposes, and also the 0.14 release is still compiling on. I'm not sure if we're going to leave them as test machines or convert them to Cent so that we have more compile and test machines. I'm not sure. Up for discussion. Not a whole lot of movement on the AX issue with the one machine. Did get an email back from them yesterday that they're looking into the issue. We returned the AX machine from OSU because it didn't suit our needs exactly. Our disk usage has seemed to stabilize around 95 gigs. Dropped to 93, and then it's up to 96, so it's hovering around 95 gigs. So I expect to deliver the change today that will separate the jobs by build type. I have an email coming shortly to explain that change, so I'm going to send that to the dev mailing list. So we'll monitor the disk usage after that change. It should go up initially, and then as stuff gets cleaned up, it should go back down to the 95 area.
Do we have a time limit for how long we'll keep artifacts? Because I think we have some builds, like some old release builds, that they don't get rerun.
Yeah, so the issue with that is if they don't get run, they don't get cleaned up. So
yeah, so if we cleaned up some of those old releases, I bet our usage would drop even further.
okay, I can look into that. Okay. So yeah, if we get that other change in today, then the actual change to convert over the PRs would be next. So I just have to do some merge conflict stuff and then retest everything, and then hopefully get that in next week or the week after.
Okay.
I think that's all from me, unless there's questions.
All right, thanks, Adam. We're down to our last 4 minutes. So we'll move to the any other business section. All right. If there's nothing else to discuss this week, then thank you, everybody, and we'll meet again next week.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.